Okay, so a new tyre came in today and it's going to go on that spare 17-inch rim. So what we got is the parcel shelf out at the moment, but we've also got the standard 14x6 tyre. The reason why I've got them all out right now is because I wanted to test fit the new tyre that went in underneath this carpet right now. You can't see it all that much because the carpet colour basically sucks in all the light. So what we got here, standard amp install, not really standard, but sub. Basically it all fits in pretty well without the parcel shelf. I'm just about to fit the parcel shelf in now and put a photo in after that. But what I wanted to find out is how well the edge of the 17-inch tyre, which is right there by the way, made it up against the edge of the 12-inch sub box. Now I'm not 100% sure how well this is going to go when we put this back in. What I was going to do is actually take this and make a nice cut around here. So kind of where that lip starts, so where it goes over onto that edge there, I'm going to cut about there and follow all the way around so I can manage to save this and get rid of the center part there because it's going to be too tall. The reason why it's too tall is because it was a 14x6 inch tyre. Now I've got a 17x7, so I've got an extra inch there, and every millimetre in height we can save. Basically we've got about 4 or 5 millimetres there, so that's going to make a bit of a difference when you stick that underneath the carpet and thus underneath the 12-inch sub box. So I've got to kind of plan for these things. So the tyre's got to go on that rim, and that's the next job. So I'm going to put this back in here for now. That just sits in there like nice. Okay, and that should be how it all sits in the end, with that bit cut out around there and without the disc part. So we'll see how this all goes. It's all good in theory. I'm going to put the parcel shelf back on now and see how it works. And now parcel shelf is back in place, locked in, and all it's got to do now is basically just hook up those little tie downs or ropes up to the hook points up there. So what we're looking at right now is under here, just for clearance, and it looks like it's still good. So with that tyre still in place, it hasn't affected the sub box's placement or how it sits with the parcel shelf down in its resting position. So that was the whole idea of this little exercise. So now I can just put everything back and get the tyre and rim fitted, and hopefully it'll all go back the way it should. So wish me luck on that. So I'm down here at the tyre place just locally, and the bare wheel and tyre basically have all gone in as designed, which is a bit of a surprise because things want to go the way they want to, not as I designed them. So this has all fitted together nicely. What I want to do now is get that bit of masonite cut out around, it goes over the top of this wheel and tyre here, and that'll happen when I get home. So I'll close this over. Needs a vacuum, but anyway. And it fits fairly well. Kind of like it was meant to be there. So that's all good. I'm going to put the sub back, put the parcel shelf back in place, and if it sits there nicely, I'm going to call that job done. Okay, so as you can see, the seats are sitting back. There's still adequate clearance between the parcel shelf and the seat backs, and the sub sits nicely in behind there. And if this lid closes properly like it should. Job done. Now this particular spare wheel cover is fairly old, as you might expect. It's getting close to 37 years now. So at the bottom here you'll see that bit which has been affected by a bit of water ingress somehow, maybe humidity, I'm not sure. Now whether that's been caused by someone who owned it before I did, or maybe it's been because I've been up here. The sub box has been sitting kind of at that point there. Now, regardless of how it got there, it's kind of what we got to work with. So that is a crucial point right now. This larger circumference around here is kind of where I got to cut, and that bit at the end is what we're going to keep. So you can see from here that the masonite is actually starting to chip away with a bit of decay, but the stronger stuff is actually not too bad except for where it's warped, which is down there. So we're going to have to work with that and kind of see how we go once it's been cut. Apologies for the lack of light. This is a fairly dark type of day. It's now in the afternoon as well. So down here we have the spare wheel well. Now, as dark as it is, you can actually see where the masonite would actually fit around. That flat bit at the back there, that is where the masonite would actually sit at its furthest point. So what we're going to do is trim out around this bit here, because we want that to butt up against this wheel. So we'll see how we go with that. So here is the spare wheel in situ. Now bear in mind this is 17 by 7, so this is a little bit taller than your stock height, so that's 14 by 6. So back here we got this gap, this cavity here, which the subwoofer, which is behind this carpet here, the sub in that box, would actually fall into. Now it will probably rest up against here somewhere, and that's kind of where I want it to go. Now that masonite should provide enough stability for it to actually rest up there quite nicely. Now the spare wheel cover, that bit of masonite I was talking about, that is kind of sitting on top of the spare wheel right now, but as you can see it's kind of sitting proud of the level of the floor pan. So here you can see it's moving up and down. Okay, so it's not quite sitting level. It's only a couple of millimeters we're talking about, but it's enough to kind of throw things out when it comes to the level of things in the back. Once everything's back in, we're talking about the soundproofing and the mat. So you're looking at about at least 20 millimeters worth of stuff to go on top. So what we'll do, like I said, trim around here, and yeah, it should work in theory. Okay, so there is the spare wheel mounted in place. Now let me tell you, that is a very tight fit, and it only just sits, I don't know if you can see it properly or not, but the washer that's there, if you can call it a washer, that's just a round out piece of metal, it is only just sitting in the cavity. I mean, it's only just wide enough to actually sit there properly, and it only gets probably about half a thread of bite into where it has to attach, which is under here. I don't think you can see that. So that's only just a win. So now for the operation, and stuck in a vise, I've kind of given it a bit of an idea of where it's supposed to be cut. So it's not a perfect arc, but I've kind of followed around where the flat part goes into a bit of a dip or a rise if you're looking at it from the other side. So that should be kind of what I'm aiming for. So this is kind of how it stands right now. I just kind of roughed out a bit of a line to follow around. It's not exactly an arc, but it will do. So what we got is a Dremel cutting disc, and I've already cut about maybe, I don't know, close to a quarter, and kind of roughed out the rest just in a a moderate fashion to try and get a line of where I'm going to cut, and based it all on those little black marks I had before. So this is kind of going to plan, a couple of little screw ups here and there, but it'll try to look neat and tidy, and I'm giving a little bit more of an overcut than I need just to see how it'll fit inside the car, and I can cut back a little bit more if I need to. So let's see how we go. Here is the finished product, finished for now anyway. It's an intermediate type of thing, so it might need a little bit of refining, but the Dremel did most of the work, and the hacksaw blade actually come into its own towards the end. So again, this stuff is probably, what, I'm going to say about 5mm thick, and the Dremel kept, well, the disc kept chattering inside of the cut, so hacksaw blade didn't quite have that problem, so it kind of came into its own. And we'll see how this goes. We'll try and fit it up. Okay, and there it is in its final place. Now, I know you won't be able to see very much because of the lack of light, but back here there is a slight gap, only very slight, between the edge of the tyre and the masonite. So it fits in there fairly well. I mean, the gap is, well, let's see, not that big, so I can get a little bit of wiggle room. But the effort of this was to, well, it's actually twofold. So the first bit was to retain the handle for the jack. Okay, so this sits back down there, and the second bit was to make sure that the sub didn't fall into the well. So I think that has kind of come into its own. Now, when I put everything back and see how everything sits, it should in theory behave just as I planned it. So here we go, and that is in place. So the carpet is back down, the insulation is underneath. Again, you can't see very much because the fabric kind of saps out all the light, but with the sub box in place, there is very little movement. So I am going to call that a win. So right now I'm going to put the parcel shelf back in, put the other seat up, and I'm going to call that a day. That is job well done. Okay, I've had a bit of a rethink on the whole situation, and I'm sure some of you will appreciate the situation we had before was less than ideal. So what I've done is gone down to Bunnings, and we've got ourselves some masonite. I didn't think they actually sold this stuff anymore. All I could find was just pegboard or shadow board, but this stuff was hiding on one of the shelves, and it should be up to the task of what we need to do. So we're going to redesign the whole lot to fit around the new spare wheel and fit into that spare wheel cavity. Yeah, we're just going to kind of get a bit of a measurement and see how it all fits in. I've done a preliminary measurement and it should fit just nicely. So we've separated the clips for the jack handle, or half saddles, or whatever you want to call them, and let me tell you, they put up a bit of a fight because they just did not want to be extracted from their little housings there. A little bit of brute force and ignorance proves fruitful in this case. So what we're going to do is trash this piece of old masonite, retain those clips, and put them onto the new board, which is about to be cut out. And here we have the clips attached to the jack handle, but what we have is approximate datum points for where it's supposed to be attached to the new masonite. Now, I've taken no reference off the old masonite because it's going to be approximate, and the shape and the space of the handle's not going to change. So if I put it basically in the center, it should just fit over the wheel well just nicely. So that should work out pretty well. Okay, so here is the space we have to work with. Now, when designing a new piece, what I'm going to do is make the outside dimensions fit along this rib here. Now, the stuff that I've got is approximately 5mm high, or not quite 1/4 inch. So it's going to fit down here and kind of fill in that gap there and that recess and kind of butt up against the spare tyre here. That is the plan. Now let's see if we can get some measurements and start cutting. So we've got the measurements marked out on this new piece of masonite, and I started making a bit of a cut line through it, but what I've done here is go through with the hacksaw blade, much like I did with the old piece, but what I'm doing is to actually score it before I start cutting it with the hacksaw blade with the Dremel. So the Dremel's not going to cut through as I noted before. It starts chattering, especially when you go through 5mm thick masonite. So you got to remember that masonite is still hardwood. It's a compressed hardwood. So what we're going to do is to keep on going with the Dremel and use the hacksaw kind of as the finishing tool, trying to get through it. So, and that is kind of the line that we need to follow. So 77.5 centimeters across, and going in by about 15mm at the base, because that's where it kind of tapers in. And the whole thing is only about maybe I think it's 250mm long. So waste of material, perhaps, but this is all they had in stock, and nowhere else basically sells this stuff. So yeah, you got to kind of suck it up. So we'll just keep on going. So we'll finish cutting up this and we'll get it off the bench and hope to have the finished product, or nearly finished anyway. Might want to cut an arc inside this bottom line here, so see how that goes. Okay, so here is the rough cutting out. Now down this side, okay, this along this line here, that is where we decided to get tough with it, and we got the Milwaukee out. So what happened was, when we started it down this end, it was all chatter because it was just kind of flexing away. So you kind of had to do it by hand with one of these loose hacksaw blades. But over here, it's nice and firm, so there's no chatter. So what we do is just go straight through all the way down there, and that made it a whole lot easier. So as I said, it's rough. We're going to trim it back after we've fitted it in the boot and see what needs to be done. Okay, so the primary dimensions are actually okay. They've lined up pretty well, but now we need to get some datum points so we can actually cut around where the wheel butts onto the new lid. So I'm going to say probably about there somewhere, and maybe over here. So we'll get that sorted. Alright, so here we've roughed out an arc of sorts, trying to measure our way around the spare wheel. So it's kind of in place. I mean, I can trim it to suit, but I've kind of got the start and the midpoint and the finish point kind of marked out. So that can be cut around and finessed, and yeah, we'll see how we go from there. Okay, here's the primary cut, and as you can kind of see, I've gone a little bit wonky, so I've had to retrace an extended arc of where I think the tyre should fit. This kind of puts a little bit more perspective on it, so it was kind of approached from two different directions, and you can see how. So it is a good tool for cutting in a straight line, but in an arc, well, that's a bit of a different story. So we'll finesse this a bit and try it out. So it would seem we've lost a bit of light in the process of doing this. So that's how long it's taken to actually get it refined. Now forgive the shadow that the light is casting over the wheel. So you can't really see where it actually fits up. There might be a little bit of a shadow there, a darker part, but it's more or less in the right spot. So it's actually fitting up into its corners fairly well. So tonight I'm going to fit up the jack handle. We'll get back into this tomorrow. Okay, we've taken some rough datum points of where the brace should actually sit according to the old cover, and the new one, that's kind of where it should in theory sit. So I've made some markings underneath both of them and around the outsides. Let's see how this works out. Alright, so new day, and last night I decided to get busy with some tools. We've got the standard Toyota brackets that hold the brace in place on the lid. These bolts here Well, before there were these captive rivet things, I'm not sure what you call them, but some bell end and Toyota in Port Melbourne, when they first assembled this thing, decided, oh, M4.5's good enough, so I got busy with the pillar drill, pedestal drill, whatever you call it, and decided to make them M5 instead. And what we've got now is some M5 bolts and nuts going through. So what we do now, we turn this over. It's only a little bit pokey through, but where this mark is here, that is where the sub was sitting before. So these parts here, where they're kind of a little bit proud of the lid, well, it's probably not going to make too much of a difference. So it's neat, it's tidy, and it should be functional still. So I already tested it out last night, and it seemed to be pretty good.